if they hadn't blocked the Great Russian Revolution, they have all these pictures, dramatic scenes where peasants are holding up shovels and picks and done in a really realistic, idealized, realistic way, realistic idealism. And it's like the only piece of sculpture that a lot of these Eastern Europeans, especially in the Balkans, lesser in Poland, but certainly through the Czech Republic and even in the Baltic states. Oh, yeah. So they were all given that story. It was the evil. Oh, when they all have money, they just have it for no reason. Usually because they're all just so wealthy. So if you con them, if you take their money, that's like a heroic act. That's how they had these little stories and little fairy tales and little myths. That's how they present that in like little kids' cartoons, like Bugs Bunny. And then, of course, you forget that you watch Bugs Bunny. But then some of them, privileged members of different families, ended up in Western European universities with not too much monetary problems, although strangely enough, the people back home were living on like $100 a month, but they can somehow finance their studies, so to speak. It's not like they were living large. Some of them perhaps more, depending on what university was targeted. But if you catch my drift, if they're coming from a post, not so post authoritarian country, and the only way out of that podunk town was to go along with some form of the authorities, certainly to get some type of financing. And so you could, of course, imagine how these certain personalities began to think that they were living some type of enchanted life where they were playing both sides and winning in the meantime. It's just the other people who thought they were authentic or like them, when in fact they had nothing in common with them, were led to believe that they shared a commonality with them when you couldn't have been more different. And they also concealed, but not perfectly well, some type of programmatic contempt and perhaps even retrograde way of seeing the world, twisted and retrograde. But because they're keeping that to themselves, maybe they might joke around, like say a couple of anti-American jokes, or engage in whataboutism on all the issues, more or less. That they could just pretend to be friendly, while in fact, who knows what else they were up to that you don't know about, or that could have happened to you, should somebody decide that take a special interest for a special reason. Or maybe they'll just throw you a screwball, like, oh yeah, why don't you meet up with this girl? And this girl, she turns out to be someone who causes a lot of damage later. Also damaging to one's own psychological health, because it might be like one of the worst relationships you've ever had. Like just bad on like every level. I mean, it's a coincidence, isn't it? I mean, you're not gonna have any type of finality as far as those things go, but it wouldn't be surprising in light of recent events, now would it? So yeah, we underestimated the skunk factor because we didn't get it. We didn't get a skunk factor. We didn't have these games being played. But of course, these people, they thought that was just a lie. They thought you were like them on some level. See, both sides misperceived the other somewhat. Like they thought somehow you had to be in on it, and so it was fair game what they did to you anyway. If you didn't see it, you weren't smart like they were, right? With their inside perspective on things. Just to sabotage you. Because, of course, because they learned that you were some type of maniacal, malign force in the world, they treated you as such, even though the exact opposite was true. So think about that cynical game, where that leads, injuring good people. And yet, if we're dealing with nihilists that are also atheists and don't care, which is the type of mentality and values that they propagate, because this is what is believed in neo-barbaristic times. It's part of the ideological matrix that allows them to do these things. So they have that going for them as well, so that they don't even have a bad conscience about what they do to what they consider to be hostile forces in a social, civilian, and economic and legalistic structure. So that's all up for grabs as far as they're concerned. It's all fair game. The thing is, though, they get their marching orders. We haven't gotten any marching orders. Like, you have to figure this stuff out as you go in real time, as things unfold. As one grenade after the next blows up in your face, because these people are operating on a whole different set of principles that are very hostile to your interests, including mental and physical and financial well-being. Social well-being, how about that? Your neighbors, your neighborhood, your city, your country, your region, all those things too, these people are undermining. And again, what was the other reason? Oh, well, you're in our sphere of influence, so that's why we get to do these things too. So they have a lot of different ways of rationalizing it to themselves, and yet this was a game that was never presented to people not in the know. Right? The public just got the globalization dream. Oh, this is all going to work out in the end. That's what the public got. They got a whole different set of things going on for them, though. So, and it shows so we have this time, this heterogeneous mixture of explosive elements, and that's usually not a sign that things are going to continue to go in such a way as if one is in an environment full of inert gases, which is what I would recommend for container shipping, for example, or tankers. That's that they don't mix oxygen into the tanks where there's oil, but rather that there's inert gases in there instead. Makes things a whole lot more safer. So, and as far as feeling sorry for these fools, don't. They started off, they didn't get any of the sunshine and rainbows that you did. They got marching orders. They got badges and guns in some cases. So this whole ruse worked as long as there was still enough plausible deniability. That's run out. So now you see them, right? Now you don't. Now you see them again. How long is that going to last? Just needs to be a clean sweep of reset, a reboot without the viruses. And then right at that point we have parity, but we're not even there yet. They think they can take the whole thing this way, the cheap and dirty way. And so the best way of bringing them to a negotiated settlement is making sure that they know that they can't do that. That's not going to work for them long term. In fact, it just might end them because that's the only thing that will get them to pull back or let's just say disappear either way. how they disappear might have to be a combination of the two. But some people would say, well, that's not a peaceful proposal. I think that's precisely peaceful, because it's a fraction of things that can go wrong if things go the other way. So it's possible that this will nip it in the bud, and so that's why I think it's the most wise way forward at this point. But certainly there needs to be some updating in one's firewall rules. It really is shocking how naive Westerners, especially Eastern Europeans, are on the whole countercultural undertones that have taken root in the left since definitely the 60s, but the more fascinating roots of it are before the Second World War, when Lenin started the International in 1919, by the way. So how about this? U.S. did not recognize the Soviet government from the beginning of the revolution. So from 1917 up until, like, I don't know when. It's like the 1930s, something like that. And that was only because they saw them as a potentially necessary adversary, ally against fascism, which seemed to be the more pressing threat. So in other words, it took World War II to get the U.S. State Department to even talk or recognize the Soviet entity. And why is that? Well, because the U.S. was a leading democracy, and a leading democracy that also knew what a real democracy looked like, and some party, a minority party, or a party that's going to lose an election that then goes on a terror campaign, that doesn't qualify as a legitimate government. But of course, the Bolsheviks, they really did consider themselves the most legitimate, newest evolutionary government on earth. And they wanted to spread the concept of impunity throughout the world. And so they sent their saboteurs, mostly of the political kind, political and cultural kind. They didn't send military people. They sent cultural people. People that had little slimy takes on everything that the U.S. did, but criticized the U.S. from the inside. No, we're not Russian agents. We're socialists. We're leftists. So imagine the leftists, these were labor movements. These were working class people that had legitimate concerns. And these slime balls came in and usurped and co-opted their movements for their own political agenda. That's what happened. The left got completely devoured by these people. And of course, you have to realize they came in under false pretenses. They lied about who they were being paid by, what their funding was, what the global plan was. No, they didn't let people in on that. They were not transparent. They came in deliberately as agents of deception. And there was a lot more of them than even today is recognized today. See, because they've been on a constant public relations campaign. No, we're not that. That didn't happen. That's a conspiracy theory. They'll do that to this day. They don't want any type of thing that would compromise the appearance of their integrity, because they always come in with moral argumentation. It's really wig flipping that the most nihilistic, most murderous political campaign ever sells itself as a moral thing, like they're on the right side of history. Everyone else they victimize is a bad guy. That's more or less their shtick. So it's so off the wall that normal people, they're not going to get it. And if they're not, people don't break it down for them into into the details, into the minutia of how they operate, and then give them concrete examples. Okay, look at this person here. This person here has this type of background. Then they start getting paid by an informal network, and then they did this, 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 and this. If you had a book filled with 50 cases, for example, then finally you could have a definitive work where you say, okay, look, this is what they did during this time period. But during the time, they were running all different types of information campaigns, which culminated in many cases of them taking over entire media operations. So they employed capitalistic techniques to further their political goals. Or maybe not taking over the whole company, but at least taking over the editorial department of this newspaper or that newspaper, and then they would all just refer back to that as the political authority, or as the political analysis at the time. But of course, this was cumulative. So there's almost like there's been collective amnesia in the West of what happened before World War I, but that's actually the most fascinating time. So when we were not allied with our international enemy for some other strategic reasons that were pressing at the time, a marriage of convenience, right? And of course, the second Germany was defeated, they flipped, right? They did not abide by any of their agreements that were signed off on in Yalta, that they would retreat from Eastern Europe. They didn't do that. They installed puppet governments. Oh, all of a sudden the leftists came out of the woodworks fighting for the working class, and they all look exactly the same. Small minority of sellouts that are willing to do that, and then backed up by their military. So then we had the Cold War. So then things were people took things a little bit more seriously at that point. But in fact, it was just a continuity of hostilities. They didn't give up any of their disinformation networks or cultural subversion activities in the U.S. During the war or after the war. They just increased it. But of course, this version of history, it at this point in time, is cutting edge. The whole time this was going on, they were suppressing people telling the truth and passing themselves off as really morally concerned global citizens, and we can't put up with this and we can't put up with that, and we're for you. So they had a lot of tomfoolery going for them. Now, what's really disturbing, and a lot of Eastern Europeans now, because we live in a more connected world, that was also part of it. People were not reading newspapers from different countries. The English was not all that. There was a lot of people speaking English, but not a lot in Eastern Europe. Not a lot of people in Russia, vice versa. It was it was definitely a more provincial world. It was a less connected world. But now today, you see these old leftists, they come out, they're all shilling for Russia. They're all saying like, oh, it was their security concerns. They had valid security concerns. That's why they invaded Ukraine. It's American imperialism. That's what they come out today saying that. They say it in English. It goes around the world within an hour. And there's like people from the Czech Republic, right? Polish people, they're all scratching their heads like, what is it? This person is an American? So then they have to start the process of unraveling these people who are total stooges and have been total stooges, but nobody has just come out and just said it out loud, like stood up and challenged them, because they usually have these fake public relations events where they stand up on a stage and are given the podium as some type of credible expert. So yeah, they do have a network. Yeah, there's a lot of money involved, and at least in this time, we can hope, with the free transmission of information, a little bit more cross-referencing abilities, that these total frauds can finally be exposed and disposed of, at least intellectually dismissed, as the charlatans and underminers and poisoners that they've been this whole time on this planet. So no, there is no unified consensus on what left is. They really do like to put labels on themselves and then misapply labels to others, and also twist labels. Oh no, now they're on the right, right? If the left is making progress, they'll be on the right. They're going to be a neocon. Like, they like reinventing words. They're going to be Tories now. But you can really see them when you just do the math and understand that they're consistently wrong on all the issues, especially the social ones. Oh, we're for this brand of utopianism, and we're just going to rah ourselves into this utopianism. And anyone who's against that, who has a little bit of realism or practicality or common sense, they're the forces of the evil forces from the past. They're the regressive forces. We have to attack them. And why do they do that? Well, because basically their Bolshevikism, it requires them to do that, for them to be the minority power usurping class that they represent. Where internally, amongst themselves, they sign off on the idea of being a perpetual minority of power holders that act with impunity and publicly cover themselves with all different types of accolades and praises and military parades and, oh, how about this, conferring freedom medals on themselves, and here the humanitarian of the century here, this fake leftist fraud. That's, they all start clapping and sending it across the entire planet on their news networks. So the situation is comical at this point. And it's really glaring, and I think it's something that it should be embraced, because this is the fraud that they've been perpetrating. These are the methods that they have been using. And now, as slick as they try to be, they're becoming more and more transparent as each passing day goes by, and they read off their crappy script, which in this case is not believable. Now, the other thing that comes across is, so you have, again, these naive people thinking, oh, well, the global south would certainly be on our side because logically they should be. Listen up, people. Stop being so damn naive. They never were ethically principled groups that ended up seizing power in former colonies. These were just self-serving narratives. So, oh, how do we gain power and become impunist? Okay, let's claim we're the oppressed people. Okay, as soon as we take over and become tyrants ourselves, then we're going to say that the side that's opposing us, that they're the oppressors, even though they're the ones that might be being attacked by some other entity that we can profit off of. We can be the middleman and profit. So it's self-interested positioning at all times. Now, the ethical Westerner, the naive West, well, I would never do that. I couldn't live with myself if I did that. Well, from somebody from the global south, they don't have that. It's just, how do I get stuff today? What is better for me today? What is the better position? Am I the oppressed person, or am I the glorified leader? Am I the everything that we've done since then has been nothing but good type of partisan? Because that's what they do. So you're expecting something they don't have. So who is the idiot? Are they the idiots? Or are you the idiots? Or are we talking about two types of idiots? Misunderstanding what's actually going on. I think it's great going through all of these post-colonial countries in Africa, for example, where you've got decades and decades and decades of data. And you can see what their political class is up to. And they have a bunch of narratives, and they're sticking to it because it works for them. And if it stops working for them, they'll change the narrative like that. So if you're looking for sympathy from people who don't give a damn outside of how much they can steal during their lifetimes, you're really going to be continuously disappointed. So just stop doing that. Like, just wake up from that nightmare and stop expecting ethics, humanity, compassion, understanding, whatever it is you think they're going to have for you, because they don't. They never did, and they never will. It's just more or less, and it is reflected in the tyrants that rule over them. If they've got the power, they've got the impunity. That's it. That's how they see it. That's how all, let's say, less developed civilizations see things. It is a rarity to get beyond that, and we have in the West, at least for a time. And yet, just because we have doesn't mean we're going to stay there. We can regress into the similar forms of barbarism. And on a cultural, ethical level, in many cases, we already have. Or at least that's what the attempt is before we're exterminated or enslaved for perpetuity by a minority of people that profit by that. There are people that will do that too. Again, nihilist. What do I need to say? Oh, I'll say that. Pay me. That these type of people, they're all over the place now. So back when Christianity and morality and ethics was more important in more civilized times, people like that would be weeded out quick, and if they were discovered, they would be thrown out. Today, it's playing the game, just hustling here. That's the baseline. So we've already regressed to that in many cases. A lot of these politicians, they're just straight up public relations people. Like, if you look back, what did they do? Oh, they should work for a public relations company. What? Like, these people are not on your side, right? These people are money people, and they get paid for manipulation. So what do I need to say? So they figure out, like, if they work with polling, and they work with theatrical companies, and they work with clothing, stylists, and they work with speechwriters, that they can pull it off. That's what they figured out. They think they've reinvented the wheel. They think they're really, really ahead of the game. But what they're doing is more or less just being a bad replacement, a false substitute for the real thing. And it does show in their leadership over time. all the good statistics go down, all the bad statistics go up. So in a future time when a tribunal perhaps takes place, you need to take people like this into account and attribute the statistical crimes that happened during their political tenures. You should attribute that to them because they're the responsible parties, are they not? So if crime goes up 200%, charge them with that. They had the responsibility. These are the statistics. That's the crime, the sentence, 15-year minimum, or whatever it is you feel is appropriate. Maybe it's life in prison. Maybe it's a public execution. It's happened before. But letting these people skate, which has been the culture, the hustler culture up until this point, ride out in the sunset with their millions, it's just a game for them. They think it's funny. Like, oh, look, I went to theater school. Instead of being a C actor, I went into the politics games. Of course, it's boring. But I made 50,000 times more money that way. And the country went to hell in a handbasket during my tenure because who the hell would elect to see a celebrity to a leadership position other than an asinine one? And so the world's an absurd place, and I just cashed in on it. Like, this is what they tell themselves. And in a lot of cases, it's hard to dispute that. It's like, wow, like, how the hell did that happen? But on the other hand, you have to think, what type of a world are we living in where these types of things are not only happening, but it's almost become the norm. So what we really need to be asking ourselves is not just how many people will be punished during future tribunals, but how do we reverse engineer that culture that we've inherited of imposterism? How do we get back to authenticity? How do we get back to recognizing the legitimate claims of what was traditionally thought of as the left, such as the working class as a whole, and yet also think in terms of real values that keep the country unified and flourishing, and not utopianistic, wackadoodle, wonky, self-serving narratives of globalist of the evil empire variety. So this is just an addendum to what was said before, but it bears noting. Move past naive expectations. If you find yourself doing it, stop yourself from doing it. Remind yourself, Global South does not give a damn about freedom in the West. Never has, never will. Okay, once you eat those cornflakes, then you can move on to a couple of other things, such as identifying and excluding hustler classes in political circles and academia and a lot of other places that people did not consider to be vital for their national cultural interests, which in fact they were and are. You don't, if you start tolerating nonsense in those areas, you're going to have a lot of nonsense in other areas, lot of other areas, especially, again, the politics. What kept politics on the straight and narrow in early democratic times was a free press. If it came out that a politician was doing something shady, the public sentiment flipped on them, and they were thrown out of office. In today's world, where you have the criminal entities running monopolistic media enterprises. You don't have that. So they think that's great. That's a great evolution for their power usurpation, but it's bad for everyone else. But if everyone else doesn't realize that, well, then we're going to get more of the same, aren't we? So the public does need to push back. And the public does need to realize that the public ain't going to solve all these problems on its own. It's going to take a lot of people, a lot of specialists, a lot of clear-eyed, level-headed actors that create the realities on the ground for the peoples of whatever free nation have them. On the other hand, if you look at it from a different point of view, and yeah, this isn't necessarily something one should do is rationalize their behavior, but you can, if you put yourself into their shoes, think about it. They're like, why do I have to live off $100 a month? Why is this my only opportunity? Why is my whole family impoverished? Why did we lose our life savings? And to be given a convenient scapegoat on such an organized level, informational level, it's quite understandable how these people could form these opinions into the rock-solid infamy that ended up transpiring because of envy and other natural instincts that you have if you're coming from a beaten down place. And again, okay, there's maybe conspiracy theories that people are forced to believe in because, and even conspiracy theories are spread around as an alternative because it's ridiculous and can be easily proven, just to give these people some type of cognitive way out of the prison they're in. This is totalitarianism. It's economic totalitarianism. No opportunity. There's one factory in town. Right? It's a political operation. You get this much as a retiree. Now they came down off of the hard mandatory employment part, like if we're going into these communistic areas, that they had that too. No, there was zero unemployment. Everybody was working. Why? Because it was part of the law. You had to do it. It was your social obligation. That's how they thought this up, this type of improved Taylorist version that they had for the working class. We're going to work you till the brakes bust off. That's more or less what it was. So did it have debilitating effects? Well, certainly it does. It's, if you put a horse in a harness and make it run at a gallop and only do what you say, oh, you have the wrong opinions, well, then you go to the cement factory. That produces a lot of downtrodden people that are just looking for somebody to take their frustrations on. So you can understand the torment that many of them made to the point that they took a deal. Right, they did. They don't feel bad about it. See, you would think they would. They don't. The alternative was a lot worse, and this is how these whole systems propagate themselves. So count yourself lucky if you got through that gauntlet without any fatalities. Just a few more odd disappointments, more than you probably would have had anyway. If you dodge those bullets, you're blessed. With each breath, breathe in gratitude and breathe out joy. And it's also good for the nefarious folk that didn't commit such a grievous act of karma, in your case, to be sent to the hell realms for millennia. So they get off too. thanks that their BB guns and pellet guns missed more times than they hit, and even the ones that hit, it just stung to Zol. So a welt didn't take an eye out. Both eyes are working, so there's that. Can just shrug it off. It's not going to be a lifelong grudge. It's just something one can tell around the campfire as an odd, eccentric story of misused people, right? Wayward people, leveraged people. So ultimately, it didn't really work out for them in the end, and yet, wasn't that their fate in the first place? How do those things ever turn out right when you start off wrong? And so they're still stuck in some way or another. Whereas we have an opportunity to just collectively put this past us, recognize them for the villainy that they represent, and move forward with all the good things in all the good places for all the good reasons.